What's up, guys? I'm happy to share with you part 2 of my analysis of the WTA Forehand and ATP Forehand structures in female players. If you're interested in the WTA Forehand and ATP Forehand biomechanics and techniques, stay tuned. We're going to dive in, look at Rybakina, Andreeva, Pegula, and especially Navarro in this video. And then we have a third installment coming with a couple more top female pros. But if you haven't checked out part 1, check it out. There's Coco Gauff and Iga and Sabalenka. So I think you'll enjoy this analysis as we dive into Andreeva first. She's a rising star. And the first thing that strikes me about her forehand is it kind of looks like many junior forehands you see on the junior circuit, ITF and national circuits, or even many sectional ranked players. Her grip structure is semi-Western, although it looks very close to Western, but as I checked it, it is a semi-Western. Look how cramped she is here. Like, this is not ATP style with a straighter arm. You can see how close she is to the ball here. There's some other ones where she does a much better job, but this is something that you'd like to see, the lever arm a bit straighter. And I have a new article coming out about the biomechanics and the physics of the lever arm, angular momentum, angular velocity, and talking about inertia and how players can overcome inertia and get whipping with the whip-like lag, that's so important, and how a lot of players are using a straighter arm. So I think, that article will help explain the physics, and I can touch on that here as well. This is a very cramped swing. This is the kind of swing you see, like I was alluding to, I see all the time in the junior level, and I try to work on this. I try to get the lever straighter, so better spacing here. She's doing a good job with her eyes, her head being still there, but basically it's kind of a cramped swing, and then she wipers, not much extension at all. Look, the arm stays bent that whole swing, and she wipers over to this and follows through to the side of the deltoid, side of the shoulders. This is a common finish. If you can look where the hand is here, and most of the female players in this video and the other videos we've done that follow through to the side of the shoulder, to the bicep. They're not following through the traditional way up high around the neck, which a lot of coaches still teach. I think that's kind of old school. The highest follow through that I have here is Pegula. Pegula follows through a little higher. But let's move through a few others. That was a particularly cramped one. And you can just see how Andreeva's forehand, as good as it is, it's not fully optimized. The backswing's medium size, like a type 2 backswing. You can see the racket here behind her body, so she's crossing the plane of her body. The top ATP players don't do that. And a lot of women do. They get away with a bigger loop. It helps them generate more power and more acceleration of the racket head. Good loading in the legs, good exploding, which is good here. She has a little better space. Look at this one, it's a little farther away. And check that out here, better spacing. If I were working with her as a junior, it's remarkable. I've seen some of her videos at 12 years old. The forehand looks almost identical to what it looks like now. It's like there hasn't been much evolution since 12 years old. But if I was working with her as a 12-year-old, I'd definitely encourage her to get more space, better loading in the legs, and to try to maybe shave down that backswing to make it more compact ATP style. You can see her racket head is vertical here. I like to talk about the different takebacks. This is perfectly acceptable. You can see that just the way she holds the racket there, it's an extreme semi-Western grip. It's not a full Western. I'll show you that in a moment. But the racket head's vertical, the left arm's across. That's, a lot of people say that helps with spacing, but I've seen many players who have a good left arm here, and it actually doesn't help their spacing that much. So it's not a cure-all for spacing issues. See here, again, looking at, maybe 90 degrees if she's lucky, on the extension. So she's shortening her lever here, which reduces the power and potential angular velocity, but it allows her to get to the ball a little quicker because it's a shorter implement, shorter arm length, she's shortening the racket length so she can move it quicker like a knife, but she's not maximizing her power like when using a sword. This is a good example of a common finish that you don't see taught very often, but I think we should. This is the low finish by the hip. That's very common when you're trying to hit with more spin. Look how low the racket is here. Remember, before she was following through up a little higher. When she was driving through the ball, she was following through more to the shoulder. Here's a good example. Both hands are away. We'll see with players like Navarro, the elbow's in there. In this case, she has a away style. Sometimes I call it it looks kind of like you're doing a push-up in a stand-up push-up, like against a wall. So you push out your arms, push out both arms. So she's got kind of that push-out. Reminds me of a push-up. It's using the similar musculature as a push-up. The strings face the back wall, so she is pronating there and turning the forearm back. Basically she's pronating her forearm so the strings face back to the back fence. She's doing it in a vertical configuration. And in the third installment of this video series, you see a player like Pegula, who also inverts the racket face, and she pronates big time, which is typical of the next-gen style. And she does that with the racket more horizontally rather than vertically. And I think the benefit of that is it's more compact. You see how high this racket head is. It's going to take longer for that racket to come down and around than with like a Pegula, she's got her racket inverted on the side here, and that makes the whole swing a lot more compact rather than like that kind of thing. This one's got a good explosion, reasonable spacing. Not optimal, but reasonable. Better than the first one we saw. And again, this is a common configuration on the finish. Look how the left arm is vertical. Left arm like that. And then the racket follow through is kind of like that. It actually crosses the left arm. That's common. You see that a lot. I've taught that to a lot of juniors. See how the elbow's tucked in there? That whole configuration at the end there, that's very common. And the racket's starting to drift. So the racket is drifting down at the end, which is nice relaxed finish. Look how she's crossed there. That's common. There's nothing really wrong with that. It looks a little awkward how her hand is up and her racket's coming around her forearm there, but that is a acceptable finish. My point is it's not up here. Stop teaching follow-throughs to the neck. That's old school. It looks Western. Look at this. It looks Western, but it's not semi. But it's maybe more extreme semi. Like a Djokovic, like a Nadal, basically like a Djokovic or Nadal grip. Iga and Coco are more Western. Here's a nice semi-open. Look how she lowers really well. Check out the wide base here. Wide hips, wide base. Watch the explosion. Legs extending. And as she lands, her hips are going to get wider. So that's a big thing for me. Hips get wider. abduction. You want to get that abduction. Abduction pre-shot, pre-explosion, and then more abduction post-impact when you're flying. So you get wide hips here, wide stance, explosion in the air, both feet leaving the ground. And the hips have to widen here. Make sure the hips get wide, feet wide. You want to have stability. The wider your bases, the more stable you are. Another follow through here. This is another interesting variation. Here she catches the racket somewhat, almost like the right hand comes right into the palm of the left hand. So This is another very acceptable finish. You see all these variations of finishes, and that's why coaches, we shouldn't just teach one finish. We should allow players to experiment with more than one finish. There's an acceptable one. It's not that remarkable in terms of technique. It's like a type 2, typical type 2, moderately large backswing. Not an enormous loop, but like a medium-sized loop. She's got lag. You can see the lag here. She's a little cramped, kind of like a 90-degree. Sometimes John Yandel used to call this a double bend. A bend here and a bend here. So the elbow's bent and the wrist is laid back. It's kind of a run-of-the-mill forehand. She's just a super talented player. Could it be more optimized? Absolutely. She's still a great player. There's lots of examples. I do like this push-out. I like to teach this push-out because generally that encourages a more compact swing on the right side of the body. But we'll see with Rybakina. Rybakina does the same push-out, and then her racket drifts around her body, which is, not ideal, but this is a good way to try to get players thinking about keeping all of the racket work on this side of your body. You push out. The racket work can ideally stay here, but watch, as she goes, the racket work does not stay in that zone. The racket goes all the way over here. That's what I'm describing. You can see that. So ideally, she would have this racket, all of this racket work would stay in this zone. That's what the top male players do. That's what Paolini does. That's what Navarro does, and I'll explain that. Good loading. She drove that one a little more. Again, you see the follow through to the side of the shoulder, near the bicep, near the lower part of the deltoid. This is very typical. Why don't we teach this? Pretty big loop here. Look how the racket's way behind here. Look at that. Ideally you'd like to see that racket kind of like here. Navarro does that. Paolini does that. They're a little more optimized. Here's a good example on the run. You need to teach this stance to your players. Or if you're a player, you got to learn this. It's a nice semi-open configuration here. A lot of players close up their stance when they're moving wide. You want to definitely use this semi-open or open stance with explosion and then the wide hips. Hips wide. Abduction, everything, feet wide, stability before the recovery back. Because she's running with the straight arms, I like this too. She's running with the configuration. She's not running with the arms like collapsed or the racket not prepared. She's running with great straight arm. This is the push-out or push-up setup as she's running. Nice wide base, then she recovers. Okay? Look at this swing. This is like a typical swing that you see from any sectionally ranked junior. I coach a lot of sectionally and nationally ranked juniors. This is like a typical swing that I would say, it's okay. But you're seeing I don't want to be mean, but it's kind of like a sectionally ranked or run-of-the-mill nationally ranked junior forehand in an elite athlete who makes it work. Look at this swing. Whoa. This super bent, super cramped. She may have just got jammed there. But, this is not what you want. Probably less than that. Look at that. I try to correct this all the time on my teaching court. She's doing it at the top level, and she's an amazing player making millions of dollars. So what does that tell you? It tells me that if you're an elite athlete, you can get away with some suboptimal biomechanics, but if I were a parent, I wouldn't want my kids swinging like this if I could avoid it when they're young. This one's better. Look at that. Better spacing on this one. She went closed stance there, but she had time to drive it. She went for it. Here's that cross finish that I talk about. See the left arm's up, and the right arm's that way, so you get this cross configuration at the end there on the finish, and it's a low finish. Look where the hand is in relationship to the shoulder. Low finish. I like to teach these finishes because it promotes relaxation, promotes internal rotation of the shoulder, ISR, and I encourage you to teach lower finishes to your players. As long as they extend out, then let them finish low, but make sure they're extending out before they wipe her. A lot of kids will just wipe her too soon. You notice here she's extending, she's going out, and then she's going to wipe her. Wiper is going to happen right here. She could extend more. I mean, look how bent she is there. It's like almost like she's activating the bicep there. She should relax that bicep and let that racket fly forward more. But she doesn't, and she wipering here. That's the movement. Wiper here, low finish. Don't have to follow through up there. This is very common in the modern forehand, both male and female. Although we did look at a bunch of dudes in a previous video, check that out on the channel, where we saw a lot of guys crossing the face up here with the higher finishes, including Alcaraz and Sinner. So there are examples of higher finishes too. Once again, I don't think this configuration is wrong. All right, she's an amazing player. I think her forehand is good, but it's a little bit suboptimal. And she's probably going to make millions of dollars anyway. Great competitor. And her technique's good enough that she can win at the top level in the world. That's also an important lesson. If a player develops this type of style, and they're fully developed players, older players, you probably don't want to change it. You could just maybe, as a pro, if I was working with her, I would just work on her spacing, ask her to stay relaxed, try to get this more, this is nice. There's no way you're going to change her stroke entirely. You're just going to kind of subtly encourage her to have good spacing, make sure she's loading well and accelerating. And she's going to make millions. You're not going to reconstruct her forehand at this level. You're just going to kind of work with what she's got, maybe try to get her a little more compact when the ball's coming fast. And that's it. When a player reaches a certain level, you try not to change too much. Try to be careful because you don't want to hurt their technique. Here's Pegula, very interesting. It looks to me, it's a little hard from this angle. It looks very much like an Eastern forehand, so she's more classic, traditional forehand. She has the vertical take back, just like a lot of the girls we've been seeing. So this is pretty traditional. She doesn't do the push out. Notice how her elbows are more in. The left one's out a little bit. The right one, it's a little hard to see from here, but the right one is pushed in, so it's like a bent arm setup. Remember that Andreeva was doing the push out. Pegula's in. Look at the size of the backswing. It's better, more compact. And we were talking about trying to keep the racket in this zone here. She's more compact. Look at this one. She gets jammed. Jammed up in there. Got to move her feet better to get better spacing. The elbow is right next to your hip. That's not a good sign. It happens. But I'll show you later in this analysis, Navarro does a great job getting out of the way and maintaining her straight arm structure. She wipers, so she's pretty relaxed here and gets a nice wiper. Rather than following through right above the shoulder, she wipers well. You can see the configuration here. I've been talking about that. A little different than before, but perfectly acceptable. So a little more like Eastern grip. She might be like a conservative semi-Western. It's too, I can't really tell from this angle. Here's much better spacing. Check that out. Typical WTA style. It's a nice clean swing. Doesn't impress me that much. It's pretty classic. I mean, I'm looking for modern stuff. It's not super modern. She gets some lag. You can see it there. So she's relaxing her wrist and her elbow. So to get some whip. This is the highest finish of all the ones we're seeing. See how she almost crosses face here. So it's a little more traditional follow through. She drives through the ball. You can tell she's going to play with less spin than a lot of the girls. Probably due to the grip structure. She's got a nice clean technique. Kind of again a hybrid like hybrid WTA ATP. So type 2 or type 3 is like full ATP. Type 1 is a giant WTA loop, and type 2 is kind of like a hybrid. So she's in that hybrid level. Nice clean strokes. More conservative grip. Here's a nice semi-open. She likes to follow through with the catch. Also, that's a little more classic. It's like whoever taught her. This one doesn't have a catch. This is a classic higher finish. Look how high the elbow is. Some coaches teach that. Point the elbow. You can see that here. This is a little more traditional. A lot of times she catches here, which you see in more. Sometimes it goes back to the very beginning, the way the kids were taught, whether they were taught more traditionally with conservative grips, conservative finishes. Another very high hand. See if she catches. She doesn't catch there. She may not be hitting full force in this sequence, but she just doesn't look like she has the same whip that some of the other players do, but that may not be fair to her because she may just be rallying here. It doesn't look quite as explosive as some of the other female players that we've looked at. Maybe she could use a better leg drive or hip rotation here. She does have a nice wide base, but it's not super explosive, She stays she stays down a lot, In this series of clips, she's not jumping and leaving the ground as much. That's a good looking forehand. Hybrid WTA ATP. So not a lot of interesting stuff there. It's pretty standard hybrid type 2 forehand for Pegula. I like Rybakina's forehand better. She does the push out. Same as Andreeva. And if she could just stay in this zone, she would have a perfect ATP forehand. She's a little closer to the ATP model, although her backswing, watch what happens. The racket's going to leave that sort of slotted position on the right side. But she's more elastic. I mean, she's also taller and has, anthropometrically, she has kind of longer levers, and so her strokes tend to look a little more aesthetically pleasing because she's just like long levers when done right. Players who are long and lanky, they tend to have kind of prettier strokes just aesthetically than like sort of squat, shorter players. But that's not, there's nothing you can do about that. That's just genetics. She's kind of long and elastic, so that kind of makes her strokes look better. But you have to look at the technique itself. She still crosses the plane in her backswing. She gets great lag here. You can see that. And her finish is very similar to the other ones we've been looking at. Close to where Pegula is, close to where Andreeva is. She tends to finish a little lower than Pegula. Let's see. Look at the end. She's down here in the near the elbow at the very end. She has a vertical start just like the others. It's a very common WTA model to put the racket vertical. In the third installment of this series, we'll look at Shinwen, who does the same thing. As you'll see, Navarro does not take the racket back this high, and also Paolini in the third installment of this series also does not take the racket back this high. But this is a perfectly acceptable way to do it. The left arm is straight across. I love that push out to try to create space, even though it doesn't always work. So this is pretty common. She turns her strings slightly to the back, so she pronates a little in the backswing there. You can see the strings facing the back wall. She gets a nice, she just seems a little looser, like a little looser than Pegula, a little whippier. Again, that can depend on what the situation is, whether she's really trying to accelerate or not. Here's a great spacing here. She's attacking this ball. Look how relaxed she is. She gets this beautiful lag here, tremendous lag, like good flexibility in the wrist. And the wrist flexors are able to like lag back like that. That's another thing. You want to make sure the wrist flexors are loose and stretched, so you can lag like this. It's a beautiful lag. And then she gets a nice extension here. This is more what I like. Much better extension, beautiful eyes on the impact. This is a good one. Follow through to the shoulder, side of the shoulder, again, not to the neck. Look at the spacing here. It's better than a lot of female players. This is nice. Good spacing, medium length lever, modest lever length. She could probably optimize that a little better. Push out, racket vertical. The push out here, racket vertical here. That's a nice way to do it. The racket tip, a lot of the male players point the racket tip to the incoming ball. In this case, the racket tip's pointing straight to the sky. She gets great loading there. You can see the leg drive, the whip, tremendous lag here. Beautiful. She just seems a bit more elastic than like what we just saw with Pegula. You can see this is a great position here as she's accelerating. She's in the slot here. Nice. And then a nice ISR, internal shoulder rotation. So you can see her hand here when you see that type of structure, the palms open, that's usually from years of catching the racket. So probably when she's warming up, she'll catch the racket. This is very typical. The players will catch the racket, and then as they start swinging full speed, they just let the racket go past with more, as there's more deceleration forces, so they don't catch it. But she could catch it there. It wouldn't make too much of a difference. Got a nice push out. So here, she's got that great push out. Everything's on this side of the body, and then it would be like a totally ATP swing if she just did the lag. If the lag took place on this side of her body, it would be an ATP swing. But she's just like the racket just drifts, back into here. You can kind of see that. So she loses the ATP structure a little bit because the backswing's a little big, so it's kind of like tips her over into a type 2 swing rather than a type 3 swing. But there's so many other good elements, the elasticity, just the basic like relaxation and whip. Like this is unbelievable. This is a beautiful, unbelievable position here. Look at this. That racket head is going to whip through very fast. Boom. From there, like 2 frames later, or a frame or 2 later, boom. Nice. I'm going to do a video on the court talking about the physics of this swing, why it's important to get a longer lever, why it's important, how players are sort of manipulating their arm, their swing, and the racket to optimize both the lever here and angular momentum to get more power. So I'm going to talk about the different variables, the issues of overcoming inertia, the lever length, the physics of the lever length, how that the longer lever increases angular momentum and angular velocity at the tip of the racket versus a shorter lever. I'm going to talk about all those details in an on-court video and try to explain it in as simple a way as I can There's a little bit of math involved and a little bit of physics, but I hope you guys will look forward to that, because the pro players are trying to maximize their lever length, and they're trying to maximize the velocity at the tip of the racket. So out here, they're trying to maximize the speed of the tip of the racket, the end of the racket, the end of the lever, more or less. And they're doing that in really interesting ways by getting this tremendous lag. They're able to maximize the power that they apply to the ball, the forces applied to that ball, without taking a giant bubble loop. And you see the men doing it a little better. They're optimizing the physics better than many women. In this case, it's a good example, but I do want to talk about the physics more and try to explain it, because I don't think I've seen a good explanation of the physics out there, actually, for coaches and for parents and players. It can get really confusing, and there's different opinions, and I just want to talk about the science a little bit in a future video for you guys. All right, here's Navarro. She's a superstar. She's basically got like Roger Federer's forehand in a female package, so I don't know if her coach is modeled after Federer. It looks a lot like Federer, in many ways. Her take back is not vertical. Like a lot of the women we've seen, the take back's vertical. The racket's vertical. Her racket is out to the side, slightly, it's definitely above the hand, but that's sort of the angle there. She doesn't do the push out. Look at her beginning here. It's a lot like Roger. Oh, she is vertical here. She's closer to vertical here. And her elbows are in, mostly in. So this is this is not the push up or push out position. Remember we saw for example, with Andreeva and Rybakina, they pushed out. And so she doesn't do that. She has the elbow in style, which is an acceptable style. You see many ATP players do that. Federer is probably the most famous one. But the players don't keep the elbow in. You're not going to be able to see it from this angle, but in the backswing there, she's going to extend her tricep. She's going to extend her arm to get a straighter arm before she lags. That's right about here. So right about here, you can't really see it from this angle, but her arm's going to be straight back there. I'm sure of it. And then she's going to pull the racket through with this leg drive. She's going to drive her legs, drive her hips and trunk, and watch the lag that she gets here. A lot like Rybakina. So cool, right? And she's going to pull this racket through with a straight lever. So she's one of the few female players. We're seeing more and more female players with straighter arms, but she has an actual straight arm configuration. It's really cool. Paolini also has this configuration. Paolini has a next-gen take-back with the same configuration at impact, so same lever length. Remember, we're trying to maximize the lever length. The physics of that is if you can swing with a longer lever, that's your arm and the racket implement, you can get more force to the ball. You can hit the ball with more power because you can generate higher angular velocity at the tip of the racket, at the end of this lever here. So that's what she's doing here, just beautifully. She's really maximizing the physics of the swing here, and she's doing it in a compact backswing. If you look at the backswing size, very compact, and you're going to see, I think everything will be right on this side. Look at that. So we were talking about how the other girls, the other females that we saw, the racket would be back here somewhere, and some females take giant loops back there, and Navarro does not. The entire swing, this is a beautiful ATP structure, compact, and then she pulls through, gets the lag, and it all happens, the slot here, the gravity drop here, the pull, it's all in this zone, as opposed to being in some zone over here somewhere, where most of the WTA women, a lot of the WTA women still are back in this zone. So that makes it more of a type 2. Back here is type 2, and if you're in this area, you can have a type 3, which is the most optimized forehand mechanics. This is according to the research of Brian Gordon, and so I'm sort of building on Brian Gordon's work on this subject, which I think he's really brilliant. I wish he would publish his research in journals and not keep it private, but it's still, nevertheless, I think he's brilliant. And so he also advocates for this structure to optimize the physics of the swing. And you're going to see when she extends fully, she's going to continue internally rotating her shoulder and wipe her over. This is a nice finish, a little farther away from the body than some of the other players we've studied. And she could catch here, or she could let it go through. But it's similar structure, but she's a little farther away from her body at the end, which I kind of like that actually. It shows a bigger, you can see her hand farther away from the body rather than being cramped up. It just shows how much she extended and how much she came in a sort of a circular parabolic shape here. Really like that. But remember, there's no follow through around the neck. Like there's no follow through there. So here is just a great example of kind of like a Sam Stosur or Justine Henin. If you remember the great player Justine Henin, this reminds me a lot of a female player who's modeled her forehand after a male player, like a Federer style. It shows that it's possible. And I think this is a great model if you're a parent or you're a player and if you have a young kid, you're trying to get more of this kind of look. And less of what we saw with Andreeva, who was super bunched up, or many female players who get bunched up and cramped. You may not get it, but you can try for that when the kids are young. You may not get it, and your kid may still make millions of dollars, play D1, but if you can get this, it's more optimized. And I think Navarro's had all the best resources she could get when she was a kid, and somebody probably taught her this. This is probably not, it could be luck. She might have just intuited this and mimicked this, but probably someone worked on this with her. I don't know who her junior coaches were, who did the technique, but this is like very special and very impressive. These are just like rally balls. She's just chilling here. You have to always be careful. Look at this. Look at the spacing here. Unbelievable. This is the dream for any junior kid, parent, coach. You can get this. Look at the eyes locked in. That is called maximizing your lever length. So the physics of that is she's getting more speed of the racket, more velocity at the tip of the racket here. So more angular velocity, more angular momentum. So she's transferring more force to the ball with that longer lever. Assuming she can maintain her angular velocity, she's transferring more force to the ball than if she made impact here, which we see with a lot of female players are making impact here, and their arm is all bent up. They're not maximizing the force transfer to the ball. And so this is why I like this configuration. This is why I'm trying to get this. And Dr. Brian Gordon says that from this configuration, you can get more spin, which is also something that I highly value. You can use your internal shoulder rotators to right here to generate maximum topspin without sacrificing power. So that's the argument that Dr. Brian Gordon makes. And so I'm building on that. I want that. Dr. Brian Gordon calls that a partitioning effect. When you're fully straight arm, you can use more of the joint rotation in your shoulder, internal shoulder rotators. Most of the ISR correlates to topspin. So he says you can generate most of your topspin from ISR rather than like shoulder lifting, shoulder flexion, or other rotations. So that's huge if that's true. Again, Dr. Gordon hasn't published his research in journals, so there's no peer review. But he's brilliant. I mean, I know him personally. He's got a great mind, and he's been studying more 3D motion capture than probably anyone else in the world. So I take what he says with a grain of salt, but also if it's true, it's very exciting because we can get more spin and more power combined if the arm is straighter. So that is a huge positive if you can get this configuration. getting the rackets close to the face rather than pushing out the rackets close to the face, but she's going to extend right about here. She's going to start extending her elbow. You just can't, it's just blocked in this video. And then from this viewpoint, and then the beautiful lag, boom. Look how far back her wrist is lagging there. She's got great flexibility there, great mobility. Look how this racket tip is going to accelerate to the ball here. Tip comes around. Now, she's not snapping here, so people say lag and snap. She's not snapping her wrist here. That racket, that is passive, mostly passive. So she's actually allowing the tip. So she's actually relaxing or reducing. She's modulating that racket head coming through here by she's allowing that tip to come through more passively. It's got to be. I mean, she's not snapping her wrist flexors here. There's no active contraction of her wrist flexors here. And from the research that I've seen, that is passive racket, that's passive wrist flexion from the eccentric lengthening of the wrist extensors. So the wrist extensors are contracting here to hold her. In other words, if her wrist extensors were not active here, the tip would just fling through in an uncontrolled way. So she's using the eccentric wrist extensor muscles to modulate this racket coming through, so it comes through just the right amount. But that's a lengthening, that's an eccentric lengthening of the wrist extensors. It's not a concentric contraction of the wrist flexors. That's very important to understand. And so when we say, that's why a lot of people object to the idea of lag and snap. You know, they don't like the term snap, but I mean, it is a snap, but it's not a contraction of the wrist flexors, and that's where a lot of recreational players get injured because they're trying to like snap their wrist with their flexors. You know, if you do the kinetic chain right, you get this whipping effect of the racket head if you stay relaxed, and then you use your wrist extensors to sort of modulate the tip of the racket and the face of the racket as you come through, and that's counterintuitive for a lot of people. They just assume they're using their wrist flexors to like snap their wrist here. It kind of looks like a wrist snap, but it's passive movement, and it's the wrist extensors that are modulating this tip of the racket coming through. Otherwise, the racket would just kind of like fling through uncontrollably, and so you need that eccentric action to control the racket. It's the same like in the weight room with other eccentric movements, like when you're lifting weights. You need eccentric control when you're lifting weights. She's not doing any semi-open stances here. She's doing a lot of neutral stance. I think we have a semi-open coming up. She's a lot of neutral stance. Look at that. Look at that spacing. Absolutely gorgeous spacing there. Nice relaxed whip. So I think this is like a great prototype for young kids. I do like the push out. She doesn't do the push out. She does like the Federer start, but it's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive ATP mechanics. And in the next video, in video number 3, third part of the series, I'll show you Paolini. Paolini has a slightly different setup here. She has more of a next-gen style. Next-gen means the tip of the strings are pointing to the back. Look how her strings are pointing down. She's got the classic like tap the dog that Rick Macy and Brian Gordon talk about a lot. She's got a classic kind of tap the dog here and then whip. So strings are down. And Paolini, we'll see she has the strings actually inverted facing the back wall, which is more next gen. It's kind of interesting. So impressed by this the mechanics, the biomechanics of this forehand are almost perfect. It's almost like a textbook modern ATP forehand. Here's a great example. She gets jammed, and look how she still creates a space. If you remember before with Pegula got super jammed up here, and almost a very similar ball. She gets out of the way, but maintains her lever arm. You know, that's a great lesson for all kids and coaches. Look at that. You would think that players would maybe like try to shorten their lever when they're pressed for time, but they typically don't. The players it's a very interesting phenomenon. The players with a straighter lever arm usually try to maintain that straighter lever arm even when they're pressed for time or they're almost jammed. They try to create space and keep the lever arm. You would think that some players would maybe adjust the lever arm depending on the situation, but I don't know that you see that as much. It's an interesting question. Look at the wide base here. Great hip abduction. Always get that abduction, guys. Great stuff by Navarro. We got one or two more here. Look at that lag. Unbelievable. It's like a textbook, modern textbook, not classic textbook, not modern textbook. Like a female Roger Federer. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed. It was a deep dive. Have part 3 coming up next week. We'll look at a few more pros. I really enjoy looking at the biomechanics of all the top players. I'm going to be doing this more. You can follow along. You can see what I see, and we can talk about the physics and the technique. It's really interesting. It's good for me to look at the players every week and share my ideas. And I think it's, everyone on the channel seems to be enjoying the high-speed analysis. So we can share ideas and try to solve the mysteries of modern technique. You know, there's still a lot of mysteries out there in terms of technique and biomechanics. So you can join me on that journey, and we'll try to explain it all. We'll try to get into the physics and understand it in a simple way and get into the technique and biomechanics more. Appreciate you guys. Thanks a lot.